This is an RNZ podcast.
It's 25 to 9 here on RNZ National, which means on a Wednesday it is Midweek Mediawatch o'clock. And Colin Peacock is joining me now from the studio in Wellington. Colin, kia ora to you.
Kia ora, Emil.
Well. This is an interesting Midweek Mediawatch, isn't it?
Yeah, that tone is the one I remember from primary school teachers when I'd done something moderately to seriously wrong. Well.
Mr. Peacock, here, please explain. Okay, so to catch people up, if they have not they've been aware, there has been quite a bit of discourse around RNZ National recently, hasn't there, Colin? Why?
Yes, there has. So RNZ has said, look, we have a new audio plan now. This is to shore up its listener base for RNZ National specifically, this very network, because the listeners have been drifting away since 2019, 2020 or so in significant numbers, and they now want a new strategy to turn this around. I mean, this has been going on for a while, and RNZ has been thinking about ways to do it. The chief executive, Paul Thompson, has said fairly bluntly, what we've been doing hasn't really worked. Mm-hmm. Listeners are still drifting away, including what's now to be the target 50-plus audience, and even up towards, more specifically, 50 to 69. They say they're going to target, which we can talk about in a minute. But the other reason that there's been a lot of what you call discourse in what could be construed as being some sort of effete, Wellington
slightly euphemistic
way style. It's discourse. Discourse. Yeah, it's been that their former head of news, Richard Sutherland, who left in I think middle of 2023. Yeah. So presiding over news at a time when some of those listeners were drifting away in this decline they're trying to arrest, has produced a very blunt plan suggesting not just a change of actual strategy and editorial approach, but a culture change within the organisation. Got to focus more on Auckland and the people who live there and what they want. And as we mentioned there, a very strong focus on listeners 50 plus to be the core of the listenership that they'll target.
I mean, it was an interesting report, Richard's report. You would have read through it. You wrote a piece about it for Mediawatch. What did you make of it?
Well, there's a lot in it, and I mean, it's what aside from what I make of it, interesting what other people have made of it. See me blame shifting there, one of the identified in the report. But no, it has been interesting. Take someone like, for example, Gavin Ellis, former editor of the New Zealand Herald, firmly in that 50-plus target group, fairly comfortably, I hope you wouldn't mind me saying, but he writes a weekly media comment of his own called Nightly Views, is where you'll find it, Nightly with a K. He said, look, RNZ's made impressive inroads into the digital market in recent years, so the website and digital products and podcasts are getting a lot of cut through. They're being shared with other media, but he says that's clearly been at the expense of its traditional medium. Now, he says the result of this digital-first thinking has been that traditional media have been repurposed to carry content neither designed for the existing audiences nor desired by them. He doesn't give examples of that, and I'm not quite sure what he has in mind. I mean, there are things like, for example, The Detail that you'll know well. You presented it and worked on it, daily podcast, co-presented with Newsroom, so it's extending out. It's not just an RNZ product. It's produced out of Auckland, interestingly, and maybe sounds a little different to RNZ output, but not staggeringly so. And is it things like that? I don't know, but he clearly does not like the direction of Morning Report. In fact, we talked about them last time I was on with you 2 weeks ago. He says, I don't need a gentle introduction, says Gavin Ellis, to the day's news. If I was, I would be watching TV1's Breakfast. I don't, because the chitty-chatty exchanges drive me insane. I'm afraid Morning Report has started to have a similar effect. And it's kind of coincidence, I guess, but this morning, just before 7, they talked to Alice Wilkins, Morning Report's person in London, who does a rap, and she was talking about a British court case where someone tried to prosecute chatty colleagues in the office that meant she couldn't get her work done. At one point when they were discussing this, and a lot of feedback came through from listeners, so it engaged the audience. It's examples of this, warm and engaging, involve the audience approach that some people like and evidently some like Gavin don't. And at one point, Corin said something like, bit of a sore point at the moment, this chit-chat stuff, isn't it? But I don't think he was specifically referring to this. But interestingly, what Gavin says is, for example, he says, I now don't listen to Morning Report. I surf the global services, like overseas news, I guess, when I get up in the morning. Then I switch to Ryan Bridges' Herald Now streaming show via YouTube for a traditional approach to news and interviews. Now, one of the reasons he does that, he says it's got one presenter addressing the camera, speaking to, so none of this interaction between two, which he clearly doesn't like, and it introduces the kind of banter and chit-chat element that he's very opposed to. But I'm kind of surprised that he finds that to his taste, because I've watched a fair bit of it, and it is very, it's watchable, it's listenable, but it doesn't have the breadth of news coverage and content that Morning Report does. And a lot of it is kind of based on access, the people and politicians, prepared to go on and be interviewed. So yeah, it surprises me a little, but I see what he's saying there. He said, strip away that stuff, just focus on the news, let a single presenter with quality and a bit of personality get amongst it. But another view, the spin-off's Anna Rafferty-Connell wrote an interesting piece, because her job is audience insights for that digital media outlet. So that's her absolute job, is to focus on what listeners want. So she's saying, look, the target of 50 plus, she said it's kind of a no-brainer if that's where your audience already is. Focus on those if you need to shore it up and demonstrate you can stop a drift of listeners away. But, you'd then have to be very confident that the rest of your charter-driven obligations to be for everyone, for the entire population, can be reached by your non-radio output, on web, podcasts, etc.
It has been interesting reading some of these pieces about this report and RNZ more broadly, and especially with one of the lines from Richard Sutherland in that report echoing in my mind, which was something, I'll paraphrase it was something along the lines of, who gives a stuff what the insiders think? Your thinking should be done with your audience in mind, not the talking heads in the media opining about every change that RNZ makes.
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, that was another thing Gavin Ellis said. He said there's too much, Wellington Beltway preoccupations, not enough about, and I think his words, I don't have them in front of me, but what enrages listeners and he cited places like Alexandra or Seddon or something like that. But again, not giving examples. And, some people, when they say Wellington and Beltway, I mean, that's because politics is based here. And, there is a heavy diet of, that's part of the job, isn't it, for a public media outlet doing a morning news show. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. Newsroom, Mark Jennings, formerly the long-serving news boss at TV3.
Now co-editor at Newsroom, yeah.
He had a different take on this. He was saying that Richard Sutherland's blunt report kind of plays into the critics' hands, pointing out that if RNZ was a private media company, its leaders would be praised for successfully investing in online media and growing that big audience to the point where its website gets an audience not far behind the powerhouses of Stuff and Herald, which have always been huge on the web.
It's left behind its previous competitors, and it's now dining at that top table, rnz.co.nz.
It is, but he says that the problem is with the radio audience drifting away. He says you've got a broadcasting minister in Paul Goldsmith, who took the job over from Melissa Lee, who was held to be, failing and not effective, and he hasn't done very much in more than a year in charge. So what Mark Jennings says was under pressure to be seen to be doing something. He's now got an easy target in RNZ. No one in the coalition government is going to stand up for RNZ. And the two-party leaders of ACTA and New Zealand First are actively, hostile to not just RNZ but other news media as well. The minister, Paul Goldsmith, did write to RNZ, or in fact say after the budget when RNZ's funding was cut, I expect you to lift your ratings, lift your trust scores, be more efficient on a smaller budget in tight times. And Mark Jennings also makes the point that on the board appointed by Paul Goldsmith is now Brent Impey, a long-serving chief executive of Mediaworks when that company had a big radio component and TV3. He said Brent Impey is a veteran of commercial radio where ratings are everything, and he will, be an ally for this process of change. But, Brent Impey also used to speak about knowing the place of a public broadcaster in the whole media landscape in which TV3 could do its thing and RNZ could do its thing. And he also, has led or been the chair of the New Zealand Rugby.
Yes.
And that is a big institution where everyone's got an opinion and wants it to do things and castigates it for failing. That was a rough ride. He will know that it's not as simple as just pointing the finger at stuff, the elements of it that aren't working, and saying everything needs to be turned upside down. So, that is an interesting aspect that Mark Jennings highlighted.
I do wonder, someone has sent me, we're going to hear some of the feedback that you've gotten in your emails and Mediawatch soon, Colin. Someone has sent me a text recently that media channels are so many and so fragmented, it enables a listener to tailor their listening for themselves, this person says. And I do wonder about, as a public media company, having a profit motive sharpens minds, right? I think, because ultimately, if you have a profit motive, if you need to keep your head above water through profits, the most important thing is to be in the black at the end of the financial year. When you don't have a profit motive, you need to figure out what unifies you, what you are working towards, and that is sometimes easier said than done, and sometimes not very easily said.
Yep, that's true. I mean, in terms of RNZ and its response to the Sutherland report, and indeed their own strategy, which came before that, they're now saying, okay, we need to address this drift in the radio listening audience. So they've set this target of getting back to 500,000 weekly listeners by, I think, November of 2026, and then lifting it beyond that. So that's going to require pretty immediate change. And, so easy wins, indeed, it's put in the Sutherland report. But then again, like other public broadcasters operating in slightly different markets where there's a lot of that commercial imperative you were talking about, where you know what you've got to do. Say the ABC television, for example, in Australia, where that's a big and heftily funded from taxes public broadcaster, but they've got, Channel 7, 9 and 10. They're not under massive pressure to have a huge slice of that viewing audience. And it's not quite the same in radio, but it's not that far apart. They're not expected to occupy the same slice of the market as they are in New Zealand. I mean, that's not to say they shouldn't, but, RNZ's strategy is to, provide media across a whole bunch of different platforms. Some people would say they've taken their eye off the ball on the radio and, in this digital transition, which has been a success in bumping up the numbers and the reach and so on. But that's the problem they've got. But also in this country, the comparison that's being made a lot is News Talk ZB, right? Because they've seen off their competitor in commercial talk radio, which was the last one was called Today FM and its iterations before that. It's just burnt them off. So it's got a formula. So a lot of people are pointing to their audiences growing, not across the board, but particularly in that morning program, Mike Hosking's morning breakfast program, up against Morning Report. So a lot of people are saying, what you're doing isn't as popular as that. Why can't you be as relevant and as popular? And it's a difficult one if they've got no charter to enforce, and they can absolutely zero in on Auckland and big markets that return big rewards in a way that a public broadcaster can't.
A text that I have received several iterations of, Colin, is you presenters slavishly asking people for feedback on everything. Text 2101, text 2101.
Yep.
Just do the radio. With that in mind, you've received quite a lot of listener feedback in the Mediawatch emails, Colin. Tell us about some of it.
I'd be here all day if I read them all out. But the themes in them are, for example, the tone thing that you've considered. Some people are worried about this, whether they're trying to be commercial radio light in order to just boost their appeal to get those numbers up, to get people off their backs. So this one, for example, saying Morning Report checkpoint becoming like, industry akin to the worst kind of talkback. Where are we to turn? Another one, saying, during emergencies, people lost their internet. You've got to be the emergency station. That's what we want from you. Quite a few. Using this word martification. Get rid of woke lefty journalists is one. Stop forcing martification on the rank and file. Now, these are small numbers of people saying this, but it's a term and a word that comes up and up. And I do wonder, we know that this has come up before, that it annoys some people, some listeners. They feel it's being foisted upon them. But I think you can listen to a fair amount of RNZ national output and not hear much today at all. And it certainly strikes me that it wouldn't necessarily be enough to put them off or stop them listening. But it seems to irritate some. That definitely comes up in some of this feedback. But that aspect of always asking the listeners what they think, people thinking it's a waste of time, that definitely comes in. Here's one saying, surely the role of the leading national news media organisation is to gather and prioritise world and domestic news, overlay expert commentary and broadcast that objectively and articulately. Sure, some human interest in other stuff if you want, but that should be your core. But when the news is difficult, times are tough, both here and overseas, and it's your job to reflect that, you're going to shed a few listeners. I think doing that, we know news avoidance is a thing. It's been identified in surveys. It's a difficult one. But yeah, on the tone issue, a lot of people claim, they say, look, I'm centre left. I'm a classic RNZ listener. I don't like the way this is going. One person says here, try coming to the regions. There is zero coverage of average New Zealanders who are not woke. Same person, try getting on someone like Leighton Smith. Shake it up a bit. It's also woke. And then 2 emails later, someone saying, surely this fall in listeners emanates from the complete lack of political balance. You should go back to what we were doing in the 1970s. And then straight after that, an email saying RNZ appears to be adopting a News Talk ZB chatty approach, introducing head-to-head confrontations, panel discussions. I'm in that 50 to 69 target demographic. I can assure you I listen to RNZ because it's not News Talk ZB. I don't want Talkback Light. So people claiming to be of the same age group with some of the same concerns about tone, etc., and maybe this perceived, Wellington skew, also seem to have different approaches and different opinions of the so-called competition. On News Talk ZB, some saying, aim for some of that, others saying that's not why we listen. Yeah. So it's kind of difficult to untangle quite what it is that's putting people off.
We'll move on shortly, Colin, but I did want to, because that target age thing has attracted a lot of scrutiny from people who say, what? So if I'm 48 years old, then I'm not going to hear anything relevant on RNZ. Is that the plan? AJ has sent me a text. I listened to Mediawatch on Sunday with interest. Suffice to say, I don't much like what the report's author had to say. I've listened for 17 years, from 18 to my mid-30s, and I often feel that while RNZ is targeting an audience older than myself, I can accept that. But apparently it's not targeting old folks enough, et cetera, AJ goes on to say. And I do wonder whether you feel that line about the target demographic being 50 to 69 has kind of been misconstrued to be that is the only people that we are targeting. It seemed more to me like that meant target people who are at an age where they are at their most intellectually curious and have the most spare time.
Yeah, that's a part of it. Some of the theory used to be that when people got to their late 30s, early 40s, they might age into it as they find they need to know more about the world and might, transition away from music, radio, or more sort of entertainment styles, and, find they need to know about economic type stuff and the sorts of decisions they would make. But now, of course, we've got other media that can deliver that for you. I mean, sometimes coming from the same companies, both in the commercial sector and in public as well. They're not always going to the radio to get it. So that's a tricky part. So yeah, that sort of rusted on people that have listened for some time and are now in that 50 plus age group makes sense. I mean, that's what Anna Rafferty-Connell, the spin-off, was kind of pointing out. They're saying, look, it makes sense. It's a no-brainer. If you've got listeners and you're losing some of that age group, make sure, because if they're the ones coming to you, they're not getting catered for elsewhere. Make sure you deliver what they feel they've been used to and satisfies others, by other means. It's a tricky one to balance it all up. But when you think of what people are complaining about, the other aspect is that RNZ's also identified that it's got to be thriving in Auckland and that it has historically underperformed in Auckland. And I've been at RNZ a long time, and that's been talked about a lot. And it used to be physically, headquartered and overwhelmingly staffed here. It now isn't. You're in Auckland. A lot of the programs, presenters, hosts are in Auckland. But when it comes down to Auckland and securing an audience there and what they want, I certainly am not. I don't know, and I'm not quite sure how you pinpoint what it is that Auckland audience might want to hear and how you deliver that in a way that would actually get them tuning into a radio station that's also trying to target people 50 plus. It could be difficult. You could do the research, find out what those things are and what makes Aucklanders different, because, you never know, are they even if they're in Auckland, are they any less interested in issues of science and technology than people of that age not in Auckland. It's a difficult one. I don't know how that matrix lines up.
Yeah. Do they have electricity in Auckland? Do they eat bananas in Auckland?
You cut them, do they not bleed? Yes.
Let's move on, Colin. Let's talk about this Media Council ruling. This is a very interesting one. A recent ruling from the Media Council watchdog has made you think.
It has, yeah. So lots of stories about school lunches, as you'll remember. Highly scrutineering, if that's a word, of the program and its faults. So one of them in the press in Christchurch back in May, school leaders welcomed the official probe into the school lunch program. That was because the Auditor General had launched an inquiry into some of the food safety issues and the mislabelling of meals and so on. Now, the story did not include comment from Minister David Seymour, who was, the architect of the program, and the story was updated next day, and including some comments he'd made to other media. So ACT's Director of Communications made a complaint about that story, and that one was upheld. So
not fair, not balanced?
Yes, but that ended up only being part of it. So he also complained, Simon Clark, about the article having an undeclared conflict of interest. And it turns out the reporter on the story had also served as the Director of Communications for Health Coalition Aotearoa, which Mr Clark described in his complaint as an outspoken critic of the school lunch program, and that the reporter had actually overseen communication campaigns against it. So he noted, Mr Clark, that the HCA was named had some comment in the story, not higher, but towards the end of the story. But the professional relationship between the reporter and the lobby group HCA was not mentioned. And that part of the complaint was upheld, but only by a majority of the council's members, not unanimously.
Not unanimously. Okay. Why is that? Was that elaborated on? What are the rules for this?
Well, the rule, it's Principle 10 on conflict of interest in the Media Council's standards. So where an author's link to a subject is deemed to be justified, the relationship of an author to a subject should be declared. So the Media Council's eventual ruling was that connection should have been declared at the end of the article. And they also said it was unwise of the press to allow a journalist to contact a former employer where they held a leadership role and worked just 2 months before the article was published. And this is an interesting passage. It also says, a majority of our members believe this is a clear-cut matter of transparency, trust and perception, and it is magnified at a time when trust in the media is in the spotlight. So that is an interesting emphasis that they've made there.
That's very interesting. The media has critiqued the politician to lobbyist bandwagon. What about the journalism to PR and perhaps back bandwagon? I mean, is this a grey area? There is a lot of back and forth between these worlds.
Yeah, it used to be very much one way, but it can go the other way too. People have worked in PR and lobbying coming back to it. Well, the decision eventually said the minority, the people that didn't really think it was enough to be a conflict of interest, consider that the minority did not consider this link so close the relationship should have been declared, but the minority also concluded something went badly wrong in the process of putting the story together. And the press, for its part, said, look, the reporter's involvement in the story was actually just ringing around interested parties. It was a bit of a team effort, but this person's byline was on the story. So as a result, anyway, of these shortcomings, it said the minority would have taken the rare step of upholding this complaint under the requirement to uphold the highest professional standards. And again, they say this, at a time when the media industry is grappling with declining trust and confidence, it is crucial media companies are professional in their news gathering processes and careful in their preparation of news. So it's interesting to me that, at this very time, it's not just about the rules and the principles. They're saying, look, in these times, you've got to do this, you've got to up the standards because the stakes are higher. It's interesting.
It is interesting. A minute at the end, Colin, for you to jump onto that soapbox that I know you keep under your desk.
I have no soapbox on my desk. Yeah, insurance ads. Just want to say, maybe this will echo with other people whose algorithm works the same way as mine or similar. I had my podcast listening ruined for, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks with one insurance company's ads for DIY dentistry. Features a guy counting down and then hauling a tooth out of his own mouth that all gets crushed up in the disgusting sound effect. And the theme is like, don't save money doing silly things, do sensible things. Come to insurance company X, who I'm not going to name. But this ad played over and over and over in all my podcasts and just makes me wonder why insurance ads in particular are so sort of juvenile. I want to see, like, road safety ads, like you make the wrong decision, there are horrible consequences. You don't have insurance, your life could be ruined like this person, not the sort of goofy stuff, like, oh, we all do dumb stuff, but we're here to back you up. I want the insurance industry to up its game on advertising.
Insurance gravitas.
That's the end of my TED talk.